You know how sometimes you really want to get a handle on history, see how it actually affects things, maybe without wading through endless dates and names?
Yeah, I get that. You want the insights, the connections.
Exactly, the stuff that makes you go, aha. And, well, that's what we're digging into today. We're doing a deep dive into something called historiophany.
Historiophany, it's a way of looking at history that can really shift your perspective.
Okay, how so?
Well, instead of just seeing the past as, done and dusted, imagine it as more of a living presence, something
Yeah.
that can actively, well, show itself to us, even now.
So history is an experience, not just a dusty old record book.
Exactly that.
Right. Okay, so for this deep dive, we've pulled together some pretty interesting material. We've got a few academic papers, things like historiophany via generative AI, the Book of Historiophany, the concept of historical epiphany via generative AI,
Yeah.
all 2025 stuff.
And maybe touching on that novel, too, the Archives Project.
Yeah, we might bring that in. Basically, our mission today is to unpack this idea, historiophany, and see what surprising angles it gives us on history and, how it plays out right now.
Okay, let's get into it. Defining historiophany. The core thing, as you said, is that experiential side. It's about history as a force we can actually encounter, maybe even feel.
Which is kind of turning the usual view on its head, isn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, we usually think about preserving the past, or how event A led to event B, or how history shapes our identity.
Right, the traditional frameworks.
Yeah.
Preservation, determinism, identity formation, yeah.
But historiophany sounds more dynamic, like a whole new way to connect with time itself.
Precisely. It suggests this transformative potential. New forms of engagement, really. Not just a fixed timeline, but something more fluid, something that can manifest.
Okay, so how does that actually work then? What are the key elements here? I saw some interesting concepts in the sources, like unhistorical being. That one jumped out, it sounds like. Ignore history.
Ah, yeah, that's a good one to start with. It traces back to Nietzsche, actually.
Oh,
And it's not really about denying history. It's more about intentionally stepping outside the constraints of our usual historical thinking for creativity.
stepping outside the constraint.
Yeah, freeing ourselves up for fresh perspectives.
Yeah.
So it's almost a paradox, right? By consciously stepping away from the weight of history, we might actually gain a clearer view of it, like clearing your head to see a pattern you missed.
I see. Okay. So not forgetting, just creating some space.
Yeah.
What else is crucial for historiophany?
Another key idea is dismantling and reimagining.
Okay.
Imagine taking apart the existing stories, the narratives, even how archives are set up, but not just to break them.
Right.
It's about taking those pieces, those fragments, and using them the source uses the term artistic composting.
Artistic composting. I like that.
Yeah, using the old stuff as rich material for new growth, new understanding.
So actively finding new uses for the past, not just preserving it as is. A very active, creative thing.
Exactly. And that leads nicely into history as a nonlinear process within the historian.
The historion. What's that?
Think of it like this huge interconnected web of basically all historical information. Events, people, ideas, everything.
Oh, yeah, massive web.
Right. And a historiophany within this web isn't just a straight line cause and effect thing. It's more complex.
Yeah.
Something happening now can trigger or make seemingly unrelated bits of the past suddenly resonate, become visible in a new light.
So like a crisis today could suddenly make us see a connection in the past we completely missed before, or link things we thought were separate.
Precisely. It's more than just interpreting the past. It's like a dynamic reshuffling of this whole network. And this brings in the figure of the historianaut.
A historianaut. Okay, that sounds cool. Like an explorer of history. Tell me more.
Yeah, kind of. If the historium is this vast, complex landscape, the historianaut is someone actively navigating it. They use tools. The papers mention a historiomic hypervisor and ref cards, whatever those are exactly.
Tools to see connection.
Right, tools to see the links between past and present. But the key thing is the historianaut isn't passive. They're actively involved in shaping interpretations, in, the creation of the historiophany itself.
So maybe we're all potential historianauts, always trying to make sense of the past through what's happening now.
That's a really good way to think about it, yeah.
Yeah.
And as we navigate this historical terrain, we might bump into things called historiotomes.
Historiotomes, okay.
The sources describe them as outgrowths or things that block the flow of historical energy. They're often linked to historiopathies.
Historiopathies, like historical illnesses.
Exactly. Dysfunctions in how we understand the past. So a historiophany could be that moment you recognize one of these blockages, these historiotomes.
Like maybe a harmful national myth or something.
Yeah, that's a great example. Something that stops a society from dealing with its past properly. That's a historiotome, causing a historiopathy. And recognizing it can lead to, well, historiotherapeusis, historical healing.
Historical illnesses and healing. That's a really powerful metaphor. So experiencing a historiophany could help us identify and maybe even start fixing some of these negative legacies.
That's the potential, yes. The sources also talk about the sublime warehouse.
Okay.
Imagine this vast, infinite storage space of all historical stuff. When a crisis hits, a historiophany is like pulling specific items from this warehouse into the present to help us understand what's happening.
So the crisis triggers the retrieval.
Right. And this act of bringing different things together during a crisis, that's called historiosynthesis. The crisis is the catalyst. It forces us to rummage through history's attic, basically, and piece together a new story from forgotten bits.
I like that, rummaging through the attic.
Yeah. And ultimately, this whole process, interpreting the past through the present, can even lead to reality sculpting.
Reality sculpting.
The papers mention reality sculpting 2.0, suggesting our interpretations, especially in big systems like politics or economics, can actively reshape how we perceive reality itself.
Wow. Okay, so historiophany isn't just about understanding the past. It's about actively influencing the now and maybe even the future. Yeah, that's pretty profound.
It is.
So what about actually doing this? The outline mentions some practices of historiophany. What does that look like?
Right, so the sources list a few. Temporal minimalism, that's about cutting through the noise, focusing on the really essential bits of history.
Getting rid of the clutter.
Exactly. Then there's ritualized letting go. Symbolic actions to release attachments to maybe unhelpful historical narratives or objects.
Like acknowledging a difficult past, but not letting it totally define you?
Precisely. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Narrative rewriting is another, intentionally playing with historical accounts, maybe exploring what-ifs or different perspectives.
Seeing alternative possibilities.
Mm-hmm. And we already mentioned artistic composting, actively taking those historical fragments and making something new with them creatively.
Okay, so these are all active ways to engage, not just passively learning facts. Now, what about the thinkers behind this? Any philosophical roots we should know?
Well, we touched on Nietzsche and the unhistorical. Beyond him, there's a strong connection to phenomenology.
Phenomenology, lived experience, right?
Exactly. The lived experience of that historical aha moment. Thinkers like Husserl, Heidegger, Paul Ricoeur come into play there.
Okay.
And there's also a link to deconstruction, especially Derrida, taking apart narratives, which fits perfectly with dismantling those historical frameworks we talked about.
So it's pulling from quite a few different philosophical threads. What about concrete examples? The sources mentioned some.
Yes, one really interesting one was about the European Central Bank, the ECB, and the IMF, looking back at the Great Depression.
When dealing with the 2008 crisis, maybe?
Exactly. They were trying to understand later crises, like 2008. The ECB, for instance, traced some issues back to policy decisions made way back in the Depression era. They saw that earlier period not just as history, but as a kind of origin point for later problems.
So the 2008 crash acted like a lens, revealing new things about the Great Depression's long-term impact.
Right. And similarly, the IMF revisited its own origins after the Depression and saw parallels, foreshadowing the need for renewed international cooperation today. These weren't just standard comparisons, they were active reinterpretations driven by present needs, revealing new, apparent truths, as the source puts it.
The present crisis revealing new truths about the past. Okay. How do we connect this to, us, to our listeners? It still feels a bit abstract.
Well, think about those moments you might have had yourself. Something from history class maybe, or even just a story from your own family.
Yeah.
And suddenly it just clicks. It helps you understand something happening right now in your life or in the news. That feeling, that resonance, that new layer of meaning, that's like a little glimpse of historiophany.
Okay. Like a personal aha moment connecting past and present.
Exactly. Even just rethinking your own personal history or your family's story can be really transformative, give you fresh insights. I remember researching my own family, and a tiny detail in an old letter suddenly made sense of a huge family event. It felt like that. A personal historiophany.
That makes it much more relatable. It's not just huge world events.
Mm.
Okay, the outline also brought up something called the terror of history and coping, mentioning Eliade. Sounds dramatic.
It is a powerful concept, yeah. Mircea Eliade argued that modern societies, with our view of time as linear, one thing after another, gone forever, can create this deep anxiety, the terror of history, confronting the finality of it all.
As opposed to older views.
Right. He contrasted it with, say, mythical worldviews where time was cyclical, always renewing, always a chance to start over. Linear time feels more final, heavy.
Okay, I can see how that can create anxiety. So how did people cope, according to Eliade?
He pointed to things like sacred time, rituals, ways people could symbolically step outside that relentless linear flow, reconnect with the mythical past, feel renewed, almost abolishing historical time temporarily.
Like religious ceremonies, annual festivals, ways to hit pause on that linear burden.
That's the idea. And maybe, connecting back, historiophany offers another way. By engaging with the past more dynamically, more experientially, perhaps it lessens that feeling of being crushed by irreversible history.
Interesting. Making the past feel less like a dead weight and more like a living part of now.
Yeah.
What about historians? Does this change how we should think about what they do?
Oh, definitely. There's always that debate, isn't there? Objectivity versus subjectivity, moral judgments.
Right.
Historiophany really highlights that historians aren't just neutral recorders. They're active participants, shaping our understanding through the questions they ask, the stories they tell, the interpretations they offer.
So the historian is constructing history in a way, not just presenting it.
Exactly. Which leads to another concept, dehistorification, from D. Martino.
Dehistorification. Losing history.
Kind of. The idea that in really intense crises, societies can lose their sense of historical perspective, regress almost to a mythical, timeless way of seeing things because the present is just too chaotic.
Like cause and effect just breaks down.
Something like that. And historiophany, by pushing us to actively re-engage with history in new ways, could be a way to counter that, to reassert historical understanding even when things feel overwhelming.
So instead of retreating from history in a crisis, you dive back in, but with this new historiophanic approach.
Okay.
And historiovision, what's that framework?
Historiovision is basically the interpretive lens we use to try and see history as coherent, as connected. It involves our horizon of historical meaning, seeing patterns and temporal relationality, understanding past, present, future links.
So it's the big picture view, the lens itself.
Pretty much. And just like we have those historiopathies, the harmful views, we can also have salutogenic historiovision lenses that promote healthier, more constructive ways of relating to our past.
Okay, so historiovision is the framework. Historiophany is maybe the moment of insight within that framework.
Yeah.
How do these manifestations actually look? What forms can historiophany take?
The sources list quite a few. It can be experiential, sensory, emotional, even feeling it in your body, like visiting a battlefield and getting chills.
Yeah.
It can be creative, inspiring art, music, writing, transformative, changing your identity or understanding, material through engaging with ruins, artifacts, cultural in traditions, rituals, and symbolic through narratives, myths.
So it's everywhere, potentially. Visiting an old site, reading a novel, a ceremony.
Exactly. And technology is a big part of this now, too.
How so?
Well, the sources mention physioimaging and using generative AI to explore history differently. VR and AR can create really immersive virtual historiophanies.
Wow.
And even algorithms crunching historical data can reveal hidden patterns, algorithmic historiophanies.
So tech is opening up really powerful new ways to experience the past. What about art's role specifically?
Art is huge here. Novels, films, paintings, music. They bring history to life in ways that really hit us emotionally. That artistic composting idea, that's historiophany via art.
Right.
Think about digital art evoking historical moods or soundscapes recreating lost sounds. Art mediates the past for us. Artists become active agents in this.
Bringing the past into the present meaningfully. Now this figure, the historiophant, sounds almost mythical.
Ah, yeah. It's presented more as an archetype, though, a wayfinder through time. Not just recording the past, but actively navigating its complexities.
A guide.
Sort of. Someone who cultivates openness, sees archives as fluid, listens for those echoes of the past in the present. It's about letting go of the idea that the past rigidly determines everything, seeing it more as a field of potential.
Moving beyond a fixed view of history. That's a great image.
Right.
But surely there are problems, paradoxes. All this subjectivity.
Oh, absolutely. The sources are clear on that. There's the big tension, subjective experience versus the search for objective historical truth. Where's the line?
Right. Does it just become opinion?
And how much does our present viewpoint inevitably color or even distort how we see the past? Plus, we're trying to analyze something nonlinear history is unfolding using often linear thinking.
If history isn't a straight line, how do we study it properly?
Exactly. And the risk of revisionism is real twisting the past for present agendas and just data overload. There's so much history now. These are important challenges. It's not simple.
Definitely not simple. You mentioned historiotherapy. News says earlier history is therapy. Can historiophany really heal?
The idea is that past traumas, those historiopathies, keep affecting us individually and collectively.
Still causing problems now.
Right. So historiophany, by offering new ways to understand and relate to that past, could be a healing force, helping dismantle rigid, harmful frameworks, untangling those historiotomes, those blockages.
So experiencing a historiophany might help heal past wounds, personal or collective. That's quite a potential.
It is. And then there are even higher order concepts mentioned briefly. Things like historiomics, looking for underlying patterns, maybe algorithms in history. Historiokinesis, the forces driving historical change. And metahistoriophany, how all individual historiophanies might connect into a larger field.
Wow, okay. Layers upon layers, pushing the boundaries.
Definitely stretching how we think about history.
And finally, the outline connects historiophany and kairos. What's that link?
Kairos, that Greek idea, the opportune moment, right? It's transformative time, not just clock time. Chronos.
The right moment, the critical moment.
Exactly. So historiophany seen through Kairos isn't just stuff happening. It's about those specific moments when the past erupts into the present with real intensity, demanding a response, offering a unique chance for insight.
So it's when and how the past becomes suddenly powerfully relevant.
Yes. The sources even mention ethical kairos when a historiophany reveals something like a past injustice that demands a moral response now. The ethics of remembrance.
It's recalling for action.
And art can be a kairotic threshold, a space for really engaging with the past in those transformative moments, history presenting these opportune moments, these kairotic fields, to learn, heal, act.
Okay. And the Archives Project novel, how might that illustrate all this?
Well, based on the descriptions, it seems likely the characters investigate some failed history project, right? And in doing so, they experience historiophanies.
Encountering those physio images, maybe?
Possibly. And realizing the archives aren't static, but active sites of reinterpretation. The characters might even become aware of how their own story, the one they're uncovering, is being constructed, maybe even challenging their creator, the author.
So the novel itself could be a kind of metafictional exploration of historiophany.
Exactly. Metafiction drawing attention to how stories are built mirrors how history is constructed. Questioning narrative authority is a form of historiophany. It reveals the interpretive nature of it all. Metafiction becomes a tool for historical inquiry within the story.
Wow, okay. We have covered a lot of ground. Feels like we've really delved deep here. So, to wrap things up, what's the main takeaway, the core message about historiophany?
I think the fundamental idea is that it offers a really powerful, dynamic way to see how the past isn't just gone. It's actively shaping our present, revealing itself in surprising, meaningful ways, especially when things are changing.
Right. So hopefully you, our listener, now have a fresh lens, a way to see the past not as fixed and far away, but as something alive, influencing the world right now. Maybe as you go about your day, you'll notice those moments, big or small, where the past seems to resonate differently.
Yeah, where a connection suddenly clicks.
Exactly.
And maybe ask yourself, is history really just a record? Or is it this ongoing conversation we're all part of, constantly relit by the present? And thinking about today's crises, what other hidden truths of history might be revealed if you look through that lens of historiophany?